Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. To get started off today, I just want to offer my apologies for getting the stream started a little bit late today. I was in a big meeting. Not only was I in the meeting, I was kind of running the meeting right before this, and I was actually talking about a lot of the same topics that we're going to be talking about today to a group of people that were, looking over the new website that we're working with a company here at Cleveland Community College to develop. And it ran a little long. It ran a little over time that I expected it to run. A few more questions were had than I maybe expected, and, well, here we are. So my apologies for being just a little bit late today. But I think we'll be all right overall. Not a whole lot to worry about here. Because what we're talking about today is, a big important topic. These words were uttered multiple times during this meeting. And kind of having an understanding of what affordances, signifiers, and feedback is fairly critical. As we're kind of trying to understand how to design good websites. So that's a big point of what we're doing here today, is we're talking about affordances, signifiers, and feedback. And we call affordances, signifiers, and feedback, we call them our foundations of interaction. Two of these foundations of interaction are related to inputs, things that the user can do with the site. And one of them is an output, things that the user gets from the site. And so affordances and signifiers, there are inputs. They're things that allow us to kind of guide user interaction throughout our site. It gives our user the opportunity to know, okay, I go here next. I do this first. This is something that they want me to do. This is clickable. This isn't clickable, and so on and so forth, right? And our affordances and signifiers give us the option to do that. The other thing that we have here is our feedback. Right, and we kind of mentioned the topic of feedback just briefly in an earlier one of these live classes, right, where we talked about how, if we just have a loading page, or if we click a link and nothing happens, nothing comes up, right? We don't get any indication that, something was done, a form was submitted, something happened, or whatever. Then we're not going to know anything happened. We don't get any feedback off of that. We're not going to know anything happened. So we might just click 1,000,000 times and send 1,000,000 copies of a form, or buy 1,000,000 hats from a hat store website, right? Which is going to lead to some really salty, upset users. If they accidentally buy 1,000 hats. So we want to make sure that we are, giving our users some visuals that show them what they need to be doing. But we also want to make sure that we are giving them feedback, showing them that they performed the correct action, or performed an action in general. Right? All of these things are super important as we're kind of building a site. Right, and the first thing that we have are affordances. An affordance is what something looks like it does. Right, an affordance is something is what something looks like it does. So just to kind of pull up something really quickly here. There's some really good examples of this. If we were in a live class together, this is where I'd be, kind of scaring everybody, tossing a mug back and forth in my hands, as I talked about all the affordances that a mug gives us, what it looks like something does. Right? Because believe it or not, right, you might not realize it, or you might not even have realized it until this point. But nobody has ever told you how to use a mug. You've just kind of had this understanding ever since you first saw a mug of how a mug works. And a lot of that is based on the affordances that a mug has. Right? For example, if somebody puts a mug in your hands and they say, okay, you put liquid in here and you drink out of it, the place where you put the liquid is completely obvious. Right? Basically, the entire mug is just a singular well for you to fill up. Right? There's one big cavity in the mug that has a bottom on it. So you pour your liquid in there and it fills that up, and then you're able to drink whatever liquid out of it. But also, nobody's ever told you how to hold a mug. Right? You don't necessarily have to, hold a mug by the handle, but typically it is beneficial to hold the mug by the handle. And the handle gives us the affordance that it is for holding, right? It's a protrusion. It has a hole in it that's roughly the size of a few of our fingers, or maybe all four of our fingers, or maybe our entire hand, depending on the size of the mug. Right? It's very clear where we hold it from. It becomes even clearer when we add some feedback to the mix, right? So with some feedback here, we actually let our user know that they're holding the mug in the right place that has the affordance for holding. Right? Because you can just hold a mug like you would any other cup, not by the handle. And in general, our ceramic mugs are good insulators, but if I have a hot cup of coffee in a mug, and I'm not holding it by the handle, I get immediate feedback of heat being transferred from the mug into my hand. And especially if it's too hot, I could burn my hand. Right? So when we say, feedback is something that lets our user know they did the right thing or the wrong thing. In this instance, feedback is a sign of a wrong thing, right? If we hold the handle, we don't get burned. If we don't hold the handle, if we hold it by something else, it gives us a little bit of feedback and we get burned. So we have feedback that's supporting our affordance. Now, if we look at a website here, and I'm going to just kind of pull some stuff over so we can look at this from a website perspective. If we look at a website, there are some clear things on a website, and I'm just going to do this in Replit just so we can have a quick and easy back and forth here. There are a few things that have some affordances. For example, a button. Now we do have to type something on our button here. But we have some affordances here in our button when we create our button. Right? For example, when we hover over our button, the color of our button changes. Right? And that change of color is an affordance. Right? It tells me that something else can happen here. But even before I do that, I get some affordances just based on looking at this button. Right? Because we can see that, the default button has a little border around it, and it's been designed with a gradient to look like it's beveled. Right? And so that kind of gives it the impression that it is sticking up, like a regular button in real life, right? Like if you look at, say, an arcade cabinet, right? It's got the buttons on top. You know exactly what to do with those buttons because they're sticking up. There's no other way that you can, there's no other way presenting itself that you can move them. All you can do is push them down. So the same thing here, right? Like there's no other way that we can, that's presenting this themselves as a way that we can interact with this button. All we can do is click it. And when we click it, we get a little flash that occurs that lets us kind of know that it's active. But another big thing that's going on here is that when we click it, we'd actually make it do something in the real world, right? And the fact that it does something instead of just sits there like this button does is the feedback that you get from that. So we have a couple of affordances here. We have the actual style of the button itself, and we have the fact that when we hover over it, we get a different highlight. Now, if we look at a link, we have some affordances in a link as well. Now, what are our affordances that are in a link? Well, we see one here. Remember that an affordance is a visual indicator of an interaction. A couple that we see by default also fall in line with some concepts from your reading, right? Knowledge in the head versus knowledge in the world. The things that we know versus the things that we assume are well known. And we can also bring up the concept of web design patterns here. Right? Because by default, a link on any website is blue in color and underlined. Now this one's purple in color, and that gives us an entirely different affordance here. Or actually, technically the purple color here is feedback. But by default, a link is blue in color, and it is underlined, which, since that is the default, since that's somebody that people are accustomed to, since that is knowledge in the world, we don't want to necessarily style links to look much different than that. Right? Like, we can kind of change the color a little bit. We can change the font to be whatever we want. But the things that we definitely want here is we want our link color to be different from our text color, so it stands out, so it gives you that affordance that this is something different. This is a link, this is clickable. We also want to keep it underlined for that same purpose. Because let's imagine just for a moment, if we went onto a website and we saw something like this, right? Because we can make a link look like nothing, right? We can make a link color black, text, decoration, none. So now we have, this is still a link. We can still click on that and go somewhere, but we have no affordances showing us that that is a link. Right? We do get kind of a surprise affordance if we hover over it, because it changes our cursor to the pointer. But in general, there's no affordances there to know without hovering over that it's a link. So nobody would ever know to click on that. There's nothing indicating here that that's what that does. That's also why we don't do something like this. Right, let's add a paragraph here. So we can have a paragraph of text here, something that's not clickable. And then in our CSS, we could make it look like a link, right? Color blue, text, decoration, underline. So now we have a link here that doesn't look like a link. It just looks like regular text. And we have regular text here that looks like a link. And if we came here and we tried to click that, and if we really wanted to troll somebody, we could come here and say, what is it, pointer or cursor. Yeah. Cursor pointer, I believe is what I want. So if we really wanted to troll people, we could do that. And add cursor pointer to our paragraph. So now not only do we have something that, do we have regular text that isn't clickable that looks like a link, but it also gives us the little finger when we hover over it, the same that our link does, right? And we can actually make our cursor default. Here, I believe, is what we want. Right, so now there's no indication that will take me somewhere whatsoever. I've completely inverted my text and my link, but if I click that link, it still takes me somewhere. I can click that all day long and it won't do anything. All right, that's how important these affordances are, these items that give us this impression that these things happen. Right, so instead of doing something like this, these are kind of our bad examples. Let's do a good example. I'll put a class in here for bad example. Class equals bad underscore link. Paragraph equals class equals bad underscore P. Right, so now we can change these from A and P to dot bad link and dot bad P. Right, and I'll send this to you all as well. Right, if we wanted to make something better here, we could actually take it a step further. Give our users even more affordances. So we're going to make a link. We'll link to Cleveland Community College here again. And so now this will look like a regular link. All right, we'll see it's purple here. So our link here's our bad paragraph here is blue and not clickable. Our bad link here is purple, and that's fine. That's what it should be. That's feedback. That's feedback telling us we've been there before. Well, we could add even more stuff to it to add even more affordances, right? If we were to add a hover pseudo class to this, right, which we can add a background color of yellow or just some other color in general, right? Let's try to get something that's maybe close to the CCC green. So maybe something that's like 45FF00. Right, some kind of nice bright green there. That's probably a little too bright. We could probably pull that down just a little bit. Let's take that down to like DD or EE. And that's pretty close to the CCC green. Not quite. So now when we run this, not only do we have this link with its standard knowledge in the world, when we hover over it, whoops, I forgot what did I do here? I think I might want to put that on the paragraph that's behind it. Or it looks like I might be having some internet issues. Because that is one of the great things about Replit, is that sometimes it gets hung. So let's refresh that. That should be working. Where did I goof? This should 100% be working. Did I typo somewhere? Did I leave something undone? Oh, now it's just decided to work. It must have just been a hung replet, right? So now when I hover over it, I get something else here. I get a little green background there. I can add a little padding here as well. I'd probably want to do that on my main link instead of my hover here. But we'll do it on the hover just for sake of time here, right? Because we got a lot more to do. And we can see it kind of pop out there, right? That gives me an even better signifier that this is clickable, right? And it kind of gets me more into this button territory, right? Where I have this color popping up on the back end. You know, one of the things that we'll do, because we might want something to be a link and function as a link, but look like a button, we can change the way our links look and still give them affordances to being whatever it is that we want to do with them. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. I definitely have more to do with that. But we also have our signifiers. And a signifier is what something is labeled as doing. So an affordance is what something looks like it does. And a signifier is what something says it does. Right, so this is a pretty easy concept, right? We've actually already worked with a signifier here. In our button, right? Our button says submit form. So that's a signifier of what this button does. When I click this button, it will submit the form. Which is much different than if I did something like this, button click. Right, here's that click button. So it's all well and good that that button says click. It does give it a certain signifier because the button says click, so I know to click it. And I know that something might happen when I click it, but I don't know what. So this is where we kind of get into some instances of where like some signifiers and some affordances are good, and other signifiers and other affordances are better. Or when we can add more to something, right? Like one of the things that we talk about a lot when it comes to design is kind of giving our user the opportunities to make mistakes. If they make a mistake, we want to communicate to them that they made a mistake, and we want to give them the opportunity to correct their mistake. Right, so these are big things that come up here. All of these different concepts. So if I know that I can click this button, but I don't necessarily know what this button does, then I could make a mistake as a result. Right? Because I just see a button and I click it. right? You might have seen situations like this where you can get into a little bit of trouble. Right, because I've seen ads, some fake ads on some sites before, where they'll have a fake button on the ad. And the fake button on the ad will look maybe very similar to the real button on the site. And that's a problem. Right, that gets into some areas of ethics and something that we call dark patterns, which we'll talk about later in the semester. Right, because when I'm employing a dark pattern, I'm trying to trick my user into doing something that they wouldn't normally do. So that's what a dark pattern is. Right, so when we see those sites and we see the things that are going on those sites, that is an implementation of a dark pattern. And you see this button and it says something generic on it, right? It says something like, click here. And you might immediately think, oh, that's where I click. That's where I click to do whatever I'm supposed to do on this page, because it's, it's this button here. It's big, it's drawn my attention to it, and it's telling me to click it. But then you click that, and it takes you to a completely different site, and it maybe gives you some malware, right? Which is less than ideal. So if we keep our signifiers clear, not only in terms of what something can do, but what it does do when we click on it, we end up with a much better user experience, because our user is actually able to perform the task that they want to be able to do without any interference, which is, always preferable. Right? When it comes to stuff like that, I always prefer to kind of do what I want to do, instead of doing what somebody else might have wanted me to do. And so we're operating off the assumption that our user wants the information or content that our website has, and then we can kind of guide them through the actions that they need to be able to do it. And so that's signifiers in a nutshell. There's also feedback. Just the response after an input, right? Something that happens that lets us know that we did the thing that we were supposed to do, right? We've already talked about some examples of feedback, right? Like when we have our link there, if our link is purple, then that's giving us the feedback that we've already clicked that link. The other feedback that we get from a link or an anchor tag is that it opens the site that it was supposed to open. If we're looking at something like our buttons here, right? Typically when we submit a form, it's going to take us to another page that's going to say, like, thank you for your submission, right? And we can kind of mock this up with JavaScript really quickly, just so we can kind of show kind of what's going on here. So let's add an ID equals submit here, and then in our JavaScript we'll create a function. We'll do an arrow notation function here. So this will be we'll call this submit underscore form equals parentheses equals arrow notation document dot query selector body dot inner HTML equals thank you for your submission. And we can even wrap this in a paragraph tag or whatever. And this, in a real world site, if we were submitting a form, we would take them to another page that said this, but we're just kind of mocking it up here since we're not on a real world site. And then we can just add a document.query selector hashtag submit dot add event listener click run our function, which is submit form. Right, so it actually did it by default for me. I made a goofy here somewhere. Let me change this from an arrow notation to just a regular function. And that'll probably fix my problem here. Submit, add event listener, click, submit form. Why is it doing this? Let's make this an on click instead of a click. Maybe I need to run a return false here. I was not prepared to do this today, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. Select or hashtag submit, which that is hashtag submit. Add event listener. Let's get rid of those. There we go. That's what we were doing. And then when I submit the form, oh, now it's not. Well, let's see if this is running on click. Console.log. And technically, yeah, it's not executing my function. Add event listener should be a click instead of on click. There we go. All right. So now it's working. We figured it out. I just wasn't ready for that today. Right, so now when we submit the form, we know we submit the form and we're getting feedback. Thank you for your submission. So we get some message that's telling us that what we did was successful. Right, that's our feedback there. And I can also tell you what was wrong, and it was just my brain not working. When I invoke the function, like I was trying to do like that, it's going to run the function immediately, which is what was happening there. So I forgot that we don't invoke the function in an event listener. We leave it without the parentheses, so that's what's happening there. Just so you all know. All of that was just to get a little bit of feedback to come from here to say thank you for your submission from there. Right, that's our feedback. So now we have two examples of feedback on this page. We got that purple here, letting us know we've been there before, and we have that working like that to let us know that we actually successfully submitted our form. Which is pretty nifty. Right? All of these things are important to us. Now, a good example in the real world in the physical world that you've read about in your book of affordances, signifiers, and feedback is the idea of Norman doors. Right? And this is again where if we were in a live class, I would do some goofy stuff. Right? Because the doors that we see here in the picture, the affordance and signifier are in conflict with one another. Right? The affordance here is a handle. A handle you reach and grasp and pull. But the signifier here says push. So this is why on certain doors that are push doors instead of pull doors, and you go and you try to pull it, that's why that kind of thing happens. It's not your fault. It's bad design. Because instead of a vertical handle like this, it looks like it was meant to be grabbed. We had a door here with a horizontal bar handle like that. Well, that looks like something that you put two hands on and push it open, instead of grabbing with one hand and pull it. Right? So the different styles of handles are telling our brains through affordances to do different things, which is really interesting, right? That we have, our brains, just based on the knowledge in the world and the things that we've encountered before, the knowledge that's in our heads. Whenever we encounter a new door, a door that we haven't encountered before, based on every other door that we've encountered before, we've crafted our own model of the way that doors are supposed to work in our heads. Right? And then we just instinctively know to push a door or pull a door. And with a door, you also get immediate feedback. Right? If you do the right action, the door opens and you're allowed to enter or exit, as the case may be, wherever it is that you're going. If you perform the wrong action, you run headlong into the door, you break your nose, you have a bad time, right? Especially if you're not paying attention. Otherwise, if you do the wrong action, you just kind of look silly, right? You push instead of pull, or vice versa, and you get that little jolt to your body. That happens when an action that you weren't expecting happens, and people around you know that you took the wrong action. Even though, again, it wasn't your fault, right? You didn't do anything wrong there. We've already seen some examples of how we can work with this with the web, how we can relate this to the web. But we have a bunch more here. Right, links and buttons are big ones that we've already kind of been playing with a little bit. But really, any UI element can be used here with affordances, signifiers, and feedback. Right, anything that's supposed to be interacted with has certain affordances, has certain signifiers, and has certain feedback. So let's look at an image that has a bunch of these in it, right? Like we see these, the buttons across the top here that we see, right? The pagination buttons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with the arrows on the beginning and end. Those give us a signal that, hey, there are more pages to this than just what we can see. The buttons beside that say get the app, right? We can see the shaping there to make those buttons look 3D, but we can also see a good signifier there because it says explicitly get the app. Sometimes a signifier is not words itself, but it's, shapes and icons. So like if we look next to that, right, we see certain icons, which, it is an interesting thing to think about because of how the use of icons changes over time. Right, like there are a group of people in the world. They are all younger people who only know the save icon as the save icon. Right? They have no idea that it's supposed to be a representation of a floppy disk. Because they have no idea what a floppy disk is, because they've always grown up in a world without floppy disks, right? Like we stopped using floppy disks maybe 98, 99. We moved on to CDs by then. But our big button examples of affordances and signifiers, they're big ones. Right? What about something a little more subtle? What about a scroll bar? Right? A scroll bar has affordances. When the scroll bar is there, you know that there's more to it than that. Arrows that you see, you know that there's more to it than what you already see. It gives you the affordance to understand that there's more there. Even something as simple as utilizing color. Now, for accessibility purposes, we want to utilize more than just color to communicate to our users, right? If you look toward the, right of the screen, toward the bottom there, you see these warning, info, error, and success blocks. And we can see they all have an affordance to them as to what they mean, right? Because the colors of red, yellow, and green in culture, are stop, go, and be careful, warning. For red, green, and yellow, respectively. So just based on that, if I see red, I know there's an issue. If I see green, I know that everything's good. If I see yellow, I know there could be an issue, or there might be something wrong, or there might be something I need to look into a little bit more. But because of accessibility, I need to support that with something else. So I need to add a signifier to it, which is why we have the words here of warning, info, error, and success. So if I'm colorblind and I can't discern the difference between these colors, I can still immediately tell at a glance whether something was successful, not successful, or there might be some issue somewhere. Right, so there's a lot of things going on here that we want to be mindful of. Right, and so that really gets us toward the end of what I want to talk about when it comes to affordances, signifiers, and feedback. Right, we get a lot of practice with that as we kind of go forward. Understanding these concepts are, it's really critical to kind of making a very good looking website, but also more important than having the website be a good looking website, having the website be a well functioning website. And so as I was presenting the new Cleveland Community College website to a group of people today, one of the things that I kept saying was, this is how this is improved. And we can see this affordance here and this signifier here. So instead of just guessing that they know based on this affordance that there's more to this, or they can see this and know that there's more there. And we see these on websites all the time, but we don't necessarily know that that's what these things are or what they do or anything like that. All right, so one of the things that I want you to take away from this lesson this week is I want you to kind of be more mindful as you're going around the web and looking at things and seeing the affordances, seeing the signifiers, noticing the feedback of the different elements that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. And thinking about how you can implement things of that nature into your site. That's the takeaway that I want you to have for this. Is to just be more mindful as you're going to websites and seeing all the different affordances and signifiers that are in place. And noticing the feedback and seeing how other people use it. And taking advantage of those patterns that other people do and implementing them into your sites going forward. So that's all that I have for you for today. A little bit of a shorter one, but these in general are going to be shorter ones, right? Because, as we've said before, these classes are more like seminars or workshops than they are regular classes. I like to say that this class I teach more like a university class than any other class that I teach. As we're closing here, just a couple of announcements. One, I've already created or reconfigured Module 4 to look more like Module 3. I think the general consensus is that we like this other way better. We like this new way better. So I'm going to try to switch that over going forward. Don't forget also, I won't be here tomorrow for study hall. So no study hall tomorrow. I'll be out of town at a cybersecurity conference. But we will have study hall again next week. So if you're watching this later and you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. But once again, that is all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.